It was the morning of Thursday, July 11, 1996, on the outskirts of a city called Knoxville in the state of Tennessee. I've been to that beautiful city, obviously in the United States. The day was cloudy, and it was also quite cold. It was early, just past 7 in the morning, and 2 workers were arriving to work at a hotel that was still under construction on Crosswood Avenue. Like any other day, they were going through their usual routine and were about to start their workday. But when they crossed the parking lot, they saw something that left them completely in shock, something that neither of them could forget. Lying on the asphalt, there was a man. He was half naked, he wasn't wearing pants, he didn't have shoes either, and the shirt he was wearing was open and torn. His body was bruised all over, and he was no longer alive. And around him, on the floor, there was money scattered everywhere. We're talking about a lot of money. Bills from 3 different countries, which was pretty crazy in this case too. And these bills were US dollars, Canadian dollars, and German marks. In total, almost $4,000 in cash scattered around, as if they didn't matter. A few meters from the body, they found a black bag with receipts and maps. They also found a fanny pack. And inside this fanny pack there was gold bars, gold coins, and platinum. There were also jewels, keys, and a pair of sunglasses. Everything was still intact next to this man who apparently had just been murdered. And here comes the first conclusion you can draw from this case. Obviously, this man wasn't killed to rob him. If all these things, all this gold and cash were his belongings, obviously he wasn't murdered because, I don't know, it could have been a robbery. What the police would discover in the following days was even stranger. The way this man died didn't make much sense. But the way he ended up in that parking lot was even harder to explain. Because he didn't live in Tennessee, he didn't even live in the United States. He had traveled thousands of kilometers to get there. He crossed almost an entire country and no one knew what he was doing in that place. So stay until the end, because today I'm going to tell you the story of a man who, in his last days, was convinced of something, that someone wanted to kill him. And the worst part is that we can say he was right. The man they found in that parking lot was named Robert Dennis Blair Adams, although everyone simply knew him as Blair. He was 31 years old and was born on December 28, 1964. Blair was Canadian. He lived in Surrey, a city in the province of British Columbia in Canada, and that was very far from Tennessee. It was practically on the other side of the continent. We're talking about thousands of kilometers away. He was a construction site manager. His job included supervising teams and various construction projects. At some point, he had also worked on a project in Frankfurt, Germany, for his stepfather's construction company, which is why he knew that country. He didn't have a peaceful past. He had had problems with the law over illicit substances and an assault case. But there's something important here. According to his family and also his friends, he had been sober for 2 years, 2 years away from drugs and alcohol. He was trying to start over and put his life back together. In fact, the autopsy confirmed this. There were no drugs in his system and no alcohol either. Blair was completely sober the day he died, and that changes things a lot because it rules out several theories, although it also raises many other questions. But we'll get to that. Blair used to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings as part of his recovery, which is normal. But it's important to point out that shortly before this event, he suddenly stopped going. Without giving any clear explanation for why he stopped attending. Regarding his romantic relationships, according to his mother, he had a romantic relationship with a roommate and she noticed that they behaved a bit strangely. And here's something I don't understand. In that interview, she mentions that in that relationship, her son laughed a lot, and that seems strange to her. And supposedly, if there is laughter, it means that They're having a good time. They're having a good relationship, so this shouldn't be strange to you. The mother later mentioned that after having this relationship with his roommate, her son would go back to a heterosexual relationship. That new relationship he had was in Frankfurt, Germany, during his business trip. It was during that work trip that he started dating a young German woman. His girlfriend described him as a gentleman, but a German colleague said that he was actually a very troublesome person and that he sometimes got into fights. And this is where everything starts to get strange, because in the weeks before he died, Blair had changed a lot. His mom noticed this right away. He was nervous, he was restless, and he wasn't behaving like he usually did. Every time she asked him what was going on, he avoided talking about it, shut down, and didn't tell her anything. But he did tell his friends everything, or maybe not everything, but something about what he was going through, and what he told them was pretty disturbing. He told them that someone was trying to kill him, just like that. According to him, there was a person or maybe several people who wanted to end his life. He told his mom something different. He said there were people talking about him behind his back and spreading rumors. He felt that something was happening, but he never explained exactly what it was that was going on in his life or around him. He didn't give any names either, nor did he say who was behind it or why he thought they were targeting him. Apparently, he was afraid of someone or something because he avoided going to his apartment. It was like he was starting to develop paranoia, and it really reminds me of this video we recently released about Ricky McCormick. You can go watch the video about this man. It's one of my latest videos, about this man who, in his case, was a homeless person and also started to develop paranoia and didn't want to be in places where he could have been alone. And of course, he also passed away. But it reminds me of that video. I encourage you to go watch this change in his behavior. It also started to affect his work. He started to neglect his position as a supervisor. He would leave his workplace open and unlocked, for example. And the question that remains is whether Blair was really in danger or if everything he was experiencing was a product of his own fears. I think that just like with the case of Ricky McCormick, which was a question people had at that time, about his story, I think it's also obvious here because this guy, Blair Adams, ended up dead in a very strange situation. Because what he did during the last 5 days of his life was strange. Nothing that was happening seemed to make much sense. And to understand this case, we have to go over those days. We're going day by day, because that's where the real mystery begins. The story of how Blair Adams ended up dead in Tennessee doesn't begin in that parking lot where his body was found. This starts several days earlier. Friday, July 5th, 1996, and it doesn't start in the United States either. It starts in the neighboring country, in Canada. That day, he did something that already gives us an idea of how he was feeling at that moment. He had gone to the bank and withdrew almost all the money he had. He practically emptied his account. Then he went to his safety deposit box to do the same thing. He took out everything he kept there, and we can mention that it was cash, jewelry, gold, and platinum. In just a few hours, he gathered all his valuable belongings and decided to take them with him. And think about this for a moment. Isn't it unusual for someone to withdraw all their savings and start going to different places carrying all that, with the money, the jewelry, and valuable items? This decision gets a lot of attention. It gives the impression of someone who was getting ready to go somewhere without any intention of coming back soon, or of someone who felt they had to leave urgently because they believed something bad could happen to them. On Sunday the 7th, he tried to enter the United States. He took a ferry from Victoria, Canada, but when he got to the border, the authorities stopped him to ask him some questions. The agents noticed that he was carrying a large amount of money and valuables, which seemed suspicious to them. When they checked his background, they found his old problems related to his addictions, and also the case we mentioned earlier about assault. After the inspection, they decided not to allow him entry and sent him back to Canada. On Monday the 8th, Blair went to his job and handed in his resignation. It was something unexpected for his boss, according to the boss's statement. Blair left without collecting his last paycheck, and that same day went to a travel agency and bought a ticket to Frankfurt, Germany. Maybe he wanted to visit his girlfriend, but she didn't even know that Blair was thinking about going to Germany. But just hours later, Blair asked for a refund for his ticket to Frankfurt, explaining that the person he was going to visit got sick. But as had already been happening in those days, he suddenly changed his plans again. Apparently, at some point, he went back to his original plan of wanting to go to the United States. In the early hours of Tuesday, July 9th, something even stranger happened. Canadian border agents found Blair trying to cross into the United States on foot. He was walking near the Pacific Highway border crossing, trying to enter on his own. And when they intercepted him, he had several scratches on his legs and hands. He was covered in scratches that were recent, but no one could determine how he got them. One possibility was that he had gone through areas with vegetation to avoid border controls, although that could never be confirmed. And as if all that wasn't enough, at that time Blair also matched the description of a person who was being sought in connection with a vehicle theft. But Blair denied any connection to that case, and since there was no evidence linking him to the theft, they ultimately didn't press charges and let him go. But his journey didn't end there. After they let him go, he didn't return home, and he didn't seem any calmer either. It was quite the opposite. He kept moving from one place to another. He rented a Nissan Altima and headed once again toward the border with the United States. This time, he managed to cross and was already on U.S. territory. He drove to Seattle, left the vehicle at the airport, and took the first available flight to Washington, D.C. His movements were becoming increasingly difficult to understand. He planned trips he never took, changed destinations at the last minute, and seemed to make decisions on the fly. It was unclear where he wanted to go or what was worrying him so much, aside from those accounts that someone was following him or that paranoia of his. He arrived in Washington, rented another vehicle, which was a Toyota Camry, at Dulles Airport, which is the airport located in Virginia. After that, he got back on the road. During the trip, while he was driving on a highway in the state of Virginia, he had a minor accident. When he backed up, he hit another driver's car and caused minor damage. Later, that driver told investigators that Blair seemed like a nice person, but he noticed that he was in a big hurry, as if he was eager to get back on the road and didn't seem to want to waste a single minute. It was as if someone was chasing him, and this witness said exactly that. After the incident, he kept driving. He traveled about 600 kilometers southwest until he reached the Knoxville area in Tennessee. And this was on July 10th. Blair had no family there, no known friends in the area, and there seemed to be no obvious reason either. Evidence to explain his presence in that state. In addition, there was never any evidence found that he had visited that place before. That's why, as the investigation progressed, it was difficult to explain why. To travel thousands of kilometers to end up in Knoxville, a place that, at least on the surface, had no connection to his life. And that's one of the great mysteries of this case. What exactly brought him there? Let's go back to that last day, July 10th, to understand how Blair ended up in a place where his body would later be found. Around 5 or 5:30 in the afternoon, the first sighting of him was recorded in Knoxville. It was at a service station or a gas station located near the Strawberry Plains Pike exit. And something pretty strange happened there again. Blair was next to his Toyota Camry, the rented Toyota, because he couldn't get it started. He told the gas station attendant that he was having trouble with the vehicle, so they called a roadside assistance service to help him. When the technician arrived and checked the situation, he realized that the car had no issues. The problem was something else. Blair was trying to start it with a key that belonged to another vehicle. He had driven hundreds of kilometers in that Toyota, but at that moment he was using the key for the Nissan he had left in Seattle the day before. The technician suggested he check his pockets because he was probably carrying the right key with him, but Blair was so nervous and upset that he refused to look for it. And faced with that situation, the technician arranged for the vehicle to be towed. Since Blair was stranded in a place he didn't know at that moment, the technician kindly gave him a ride in his truck to a nearby hotel, the Fairfield Inn. In this hotel, the security cameras recorded Blair in the lobby. For about 40 minutes he was walking back and forth, going in and out of the hotel, as if he was thinking about what to do, or as if he was waiting for something. It seemed like he couldn't make a decision. A hotel employee, who later spoke with the officers, said that she saw Blair acting very paranoid that night. He was nervous, agitated, and it seemed like he was waiting for someone to come into the hotel looking for him. At 7 p.m., Blair paid for a room with a $100 bill, but when the receptionist tried to give him the change, he just turned around and left the hotel. And he didn't even wait to get his change. Although he had paid for the room, he never actually used it. He didn't go into the room, he didn't spend the night there, and he didn't return to the hotel. After leaving the lobby, he walked away and disappeared into the darkness of the night. The next morning was when they found his body in the parking lot of another hotel that was still under construction on Crosswood Avenue. The striking thing is that this place was right across the highway, very close to the hotel where he had paid for a room just hours earlier. In other words, Blair left the Fairfield Inn, crossed the highway area, and ended up dead practically in front of the place where he could have spent the night. Now, let's look at the scene in more detail, because every element they found makes the case even harder to understand. Blair was found half naked, he wasn't wearing pants, socks, or shoes, and his shirt was open. The strange thing is that those clothes hadn't disappeared. His pants, shoes, and socks were found near the body, lying in the same area where he was found. As I told you, near Blair there was money from 3 different countries, almost $4,000 in cash scattered on the ground, only meters from where his body was found. And next to him was also the small black fanny pack he carried with him. And inside, as I said, there were gold bars, gold coins, also platinum, valuable jewelry, and other items. That made the scene very puzzling. If the goal had been to take his belongings, there was a small fortune within reach. However, all those valuable items were left behind next to the body, so obviously, as I just said, we can say this wasn't a robbery. So either they wanted to kill him, or there was another explanation. Blair's body was taken to the University of Tennessee Medical Center for an autopsy, and the results helped show that his last moments were very violent. Blair had a lot of cuts and scrapes all over his body. The police believe that several of those wounds were caused while he was defending himself. Everything indicated that he tried to resist and defend himself before he died. This wasn't someone who was simply taken by surprise. There were also signs that there was a struggle. His hands were bloody, as if he had raised them to protect his face. One of his hands had a deep cut, and that same hand was blackened and injured, as if he had dragged it or struck it hard against the floor. In fact, in his right hand, the forensic experts found a lock of long hair that didn't belong to him. He probably tore a lock of hair from the killer while he was fighting for his life. The wound that killed him was different. He took a blow to the stomach so hard that it ruptured his stomach from the inside. That rupture caused a massive infection, what doctors call septic shock, which was the official cause of his death. Sepsis caused by a perforation of the abdomen. And what could have caused such a strong blow? The investigators have 2 different theories. On one hand, they thought the blow could have been caused by the bumper of a car. That is, Blair was either run over or hit by a vehicle. Some did not agree with that theory. They believed that the fatal blow was from a kick so strong that it burst his stomach. Blair also had a wound on his forehead. The doctors determined that this wound was caused by a weapon, or with something hard and heavy, possibly an iron bar, a stick, or a club. And there's one more detail that makes everything even more disturbing. Blair's body showed signs of sexual abuse. Yes, but here there was a huge problem for the investigators. There was no DNA. There was no genetic evidence left that could be used to identify the attacker. The autopsy revealed one last, rather curious thing. In Blair's stomach, the doctors found undigested food. There was lettuce, there was meat, and there was shrimp. This meant that at some point during that last night, he ate something somewhere. Both pieces were at the... It could have been with someone or alone. And this must have been shortly before he died. But obviously no one knows where this was or with whom. The police also looked for witnesses, and that's how two women came forward saying they had seen something. They said they saw Blair talking to a man outside the Cracker Barrel restaurant near the hotel where he had stayed. With the description from those two women, the police made a composite sketch of that unknown man, but they were never able to identify him. But later, the detectives ruled out that it was Blair who had been seen by the women. Here's another mystery. There's something the investigators were never able to solve. There's a 12-hour gap in Blair's timeline. 12 hours in which he wasn't at the hotel and no one knows where he was, what he did or who he was with. And here is the saddest part of the whole investigation. In an interview from 2010, the Knoxville police themselves revealed something. In all those years, they had never received a single credible lead. Not one. No one called with useful information. There were no confessions. No one turned anyone in, and the case came to a complete standstill. Years went by. A decade went by, 2 decades went by, and nothing had changed. No one was charged. All the leads were exhausted. The only thing left was that single strand of hair in an evidence bag. As with every unsolved case, over time, several theories emerged. Some come from the police themselves, others come from investigations into the case and from people who studied it. But let's look at them one by one, because some explain certain situations in this story, but none really explain all the details or can justify everything that happened with this case. What? This is the local police's favorite theory. The idea is as follows. Since Blair appeared half naked, without pants, and with signs of abuse, the investigators believe that his death may have had to do with an intimate act that got out of control, and obviously with a man. Yes, it could have been with a woman too, because that was being talked about. But as we know, in this story there were bisexual tendencies, so to speak. And, for this police theory, it would have had to be a man who got intimately involved with Blair. The sheriff thought that Blair might have picked someone up at the nearby truck stop. The area is known for having people who provide intimate services. The detective said he might have started the act with a worker from this line of work, and that he didn't finish it, and at that moment they tried to rob him, or maybe it was a female or male sex worker. It could also be that the worker had a pimp nearby, that they were going to rob him, and in the middle of all that they got scared. It's believed that everything happened inside a car, that something went wrong, that they hit Blair, that they threw him out of the vehicle, and that the fatal blow to his stomach was caused by the car's bumper when it started moving. That would explain why his hand was bloody, it was also blackened, scraped against the pavement, and why his things were scattered 100 meters away, as if thrown from a moving car. But this theory has a huge problem. If it was a robbery or an assault gone wrong, why did they leave the money and the gold? That didn't add up. No thief leaves a fortune like that behind. The answer the police give is that maybe they got scared, that it was nighttime, it was dark, they grabbed what they thought was all the money and ran out without realizing they were leaving the gold behind. One of the detectives said this isn't like in the movies. Sometimes criminals get scared and, well, they flee the scene without taking anything. This theory is supported by what Blair himself said before he died. Remember that he told his friends that someone wanted to kill him, and he told his mom that someone was spreading rumors about him. According to this hypothesis, someone from Blair's past may have tracked him down and found him. Maybe someone related to his old addiction problems, maybe a debt that was left unpaid, or something that happened in those 12 hours that no one could explain. The idea is that Blair knew he was being followed, and that's why he emptied his accounts and ran away, trying to escape. Some people believe that the ticket to Germany was a red herring, that Blair bought it on purpose to throw off whoever was following him, to make them think he was leaving the country. While in reality he was crossing into the United States, and his final destination was apparently Tennessee, or maybe not, we just don't know. Maybe Tennessee could have just been a stop as well. And he wanted to go further. If he went farther south, it could have been North Carolina, South Carolina, even Florida or Georgia. But this theory also has a big problem. The police never found any evidence that anyone was actually following him. There were no threatening calls, letters, messages, nothing to prove that there was actually a person who was really stalking him. And I think it's also worth mentioning that this goes from Canada into the United States. How? If he was being followed or stalked? No. It's not very consistent. No, that this person who was supposedly following him in Canada would have gone all the way to the specific place where Blair would end up. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I feel like it's less realistic. This is perhaps the saddest theory, and for many, the most likely one. This hypothesis doesn't focus on a killer, but on Blair himself. The idea is Blair had a psychological breakdown in his final days. And think about everything he did. He emptied all his accounts and carried all his gold with him. He left the country without properly telling anyone. He bought a ticket to one place but ended up going somewhere else. He was in a hurry, he was nervous, and it was also mentioned that he was paranoid. And remember the key incident. Blair was using the wrong key. The key to a car that was thousands of kilometers away, and he didn't even want to check his pockets. The mechanic thought he was crazy. According to this theory, his mental state was getting worse. The paranoia that someone wanted to kill him could have been part of that breakdown. And in that state, confused and desperate, he ended up in a dangerous place at night where someone took advantage of him. We also have to say that it could have been that someone hit him, and that's why he ended up that way. And the people or the person who hit him fled the scene knowing they had killed him. That should also be analyzed. This hypothesis matches many details but doesn't explain everything. Because even if Blair had had a mental breakdown, that doesn't explain who beat him to death or why. There's one last idea that circulates among those who studied this case. We're talking about people who, like us, become fans of or obsessed with a particular case, and they go on Reddit and other platforms to investigate further. And the truth is, it's a pretty disturbing theory or hypothesis. Some people believe that the whole scene was staged. In other words, that the killer left the money, and the gold was thrown there on purpose. Precisely to confuse the police, and so that the case would be impossible to solve, or rather, to understand, because nothing made sense. And why does this look too strange to be random? Maybe that was exactly the point. The idea is that someone wanted this to look like a completely senseless mystery. And if that was the intention, you have to admit they did it. After almost 30 years, what we have are loose pieces of a story that was never fully put together. We know who Blair Adams was, a 31-year-old Canadian, sober, who in his last days was convinced that someone wanted to kill him. We know how he died. We know that he ended up being beaten, injured, with his stomach ruptured by a brutal blow. He was half naked in the parking lot of a hotel under construction, and also remember, his money and valuables were there. We don't know why he went to Tennessee, what he did during those 12 hours he was missing. It was never possible to determine whose lock of hair he had in his hand. It also wasn't clear if there was really someone chasing him, or if everything was related to the fears he had been expressing. And above all, it is still unknown who was responsible for ending his life. The case of Blair Adams remains open, with no culprits, no convictions, and no answers. One of those stories where the more you know about the case, the less you understand. A death that defies all logic, and that after almost 30 years is still exactly what this sheriff said about this case. That it's one of the strangest and most mysterious scenes that have ever been seen. A very interesting case, honestly. That's it for today's case. I look forward to your comments down below. Let me know which of all the theories seems the most likely to you, or if you have another idea. Personally, I think it could have been an accident, to be honest. Everything points to that, but at the same time, as I said at the end of this video, it doesn't fit with all the details of this story. It's a strange case. So we'll meet again in the next story.